Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be breaking down 3 different pressing styles of football that have become quite prominent in women's football here on She Scores Bangers. As women's football continues to attract more fans and gain popularity, so have a lot of key factors in how football is played. A key factor that was very boldly highlighted in the Euros was the amount of pressing that was taking place. In other words, the frequency of pressing had tripled since the last Euros beforehand. The correlation between pressing styles and the clubs that have found success in the last few years is astonishing. Now, before we start discussing and breaking down the 3 different styles of pressing that we have been seeing over the last few years, it's important to know what pressing is. Pressing is not a new core principle, it's not something that has just appeared, it's just simply something that has surfaced with a higher frequency. Essentially, it's when the defending team puts pressure on the opposition either by closing them down, closing the players around them down, or even moving players to block off certain areas on the pitch. Each player on the team has a different roles. Attackers usually chase after defenders, midfielders shadow mark, and usually cut lines and passes. There are different kind of pressing where you have high box pressing, middle box pressing, and low block pressing. The 3 kinds that we're going to be talking about today are all high box pressing. It usually consists of planting triggers to increase turnovers and force players into uncomfortable positions. That could be something like hesitation, a bad touch, and just simple cues like that must be recognized by the presser. However, they also must be supported by their teammates. Hence why it's super important for teams to check their shape and also make sure that their lines are covered. Otherwise, they're going to be overexposing themselves. So in a nutshell, pressing is really trying to regain possession. You lost the ball and you're trying to have it back. And there's 2 main goals that are going to come out of that. The first goal is that you're trying to produce an attack the second you get the ball back. A second goal is trying to regain possession simply to dictate the pace into producing more attacks. I'm going to start off with Jonas and Arsenal. Arsenal are currently sitting top of the table. They have 14 consecutive WSL wins and have looked like a very frightening side. Jonas's pressing style is pretty much regaining possession the second you lose it, not allowing the opposition to regroup, which is kind of a vulnerable stage. Because in reality, no team is ready to start their attack the second they get the ball, unless you're a very, very special team. Otherwise, you're probably in a very vulnerable position trying to regroup. It takes a few seconds sometimes to get everybody in the right position. And so Jonas goes and attacks that vulnerable stage. How he usually does this is he has his 3 front players position themselves between the fullbacks and the center backs. We're going to be referring to those as Caitlin Ford, Stina Blackstenius, and Mead. They put themselves in a position of a 3v4, which, let's be honest, with the quality Arsenal has up top, they can cause some problems pressing. Now, when the opposition is trying to get out of that stage, they're going to try to go to the fullbacks or maybe sometimes go far. Now, the reason I said they have to go to the fullbacks or go far wide is that nobody's going to be passing in the middle when they're going up against Arsenal, where maybe typically you're met by Vivian Miedema if she's playing a 10 role. No one is going to want to pass in the middle. However, when they do go over to the fullbacks, they are met by the holding midfielders and the slightly high Arsenal fullbacks. Now, to allow this to happen, Arsenal usually drops their defensive midfielder a little bit backwards on the pitch. That usually sometimes is Leah Volti, depending on who is controlling the midfield, to have some kind of coverage when the fullbacks do go far up. Now, let's say that happens and Arsenal regains possession. If you really look at how it's broken down, they just have so many playmakers up high to be involved. Hence, you always have a different amount of goal scorers on Arsenal's score sheet. This takes a great amount of communication. If Wally is dropping backwards, McCabe can go up high. If Wally is the one to push forward, then McCabe usually cuts a little bit more centrally to kind of cover that midfield area. Again, this takes a ton of communication and a lot of practice in training. That's why they're able to immediately create chances. They're able to immediately score something and make something out of just lost possession in the back. And that possession that they keep is always in the final third of the opposition. Again, a very dangerous place to be playing in. Moving on to Barca, their pressing is slightly different as their main goal is to keep possession on the ball as much as possible. Rather than create chances, stray more structured and organized, dictating the pace of the game. Therefore, they're less aggressive with the initial press and overall have less numbers flooding forward. Essentially, they have a ton more players blocking those passing lanes up higher in the pitch. Whoever is operating in the striker position will often force a play, but with how the midfielders are positioned and how kind of pushed in the wingers are, The opposition really does not have many options. Now this makes it a lot harder for opposition to cut into the middle and have their possession in the middle. So usually it's pushed on the sides, on the wings. But again, not many options are present and they're usually boxed up with at least 3 players around them. So over here with Barca, their midfielders are essentially the ones dictating the press compared to Arsenal's forwards. This is not new knowledge. A ton of Spanish media have covered this kind of pressing, and they usually refer to it as the 6-second rule, where a team has to regain the possession within 6 seconds of losing it. Hence why you see just a ton of possession in every single Barca game. Now, if you Google anything about the 6-second rule, you would usually see Pep Guardiola talking about it, because that's also what he likes to implement with City. He's Spanish, and so this is clearly kind of a Spanish mindset to have possession, to enjoy your possession and not to rush it, but dictate it. The last kind of pressing style, which also is another fun physical pressing style, is Wolfsburg. With Wolfsburg, you also see another pattern of midfielders being involved, but compared to Barca, they're not necessarily trying to cut passing lanes. They're rather trying to pressure and press the player who's receiving the ball. If you look at their lineups, they initially start with a 4-2-3-1, but how they press usually lets them end up in a 4-4-2 lopsided formation, with 2 strikers pushing pretty high. Let's say Brandon Pop in this position. Their main goal is to cover the center back pairing, to pressure the center back pairings as much as possible. If the goalkeeper is pushing upwards to help that center back pairing, that would also become part of their job. Behind them, let's say you have Huth, who has incredible spatial awareness, and so alongside Ruud, let's say, who's helping her, their main goal is to make sure that there's no central regression, which is a very, very tricky job, because you're holding that entire kind of line, making sure nothing is going past it in the direction against you. So opposition can't move in the middle. They have to somehow to push to the wings. When they push to the wings, they are met up with more midfielders. Huth, again, is likely to be one of those midfielders imposing that kind of terrifying pressure to the receiving player. This aids their style of one-to-one marking. They do this very, very well. I personally have not seen a team yet that executes one-to-one marking as good as Wolfsburg. You're blocking off receiving players. You're blocking off passes that can get to receiving players, and that's really the whole mentality. When they get their possession, they keep it nicely and they keep it vertically as well. These pressing styles are currently dominating, but it's so hard to be able to achieve a pressing style like this for 90 minutes straight. But there's a reason not every single team is able to do what Arsenal is doing, what Barca is doing, what Wolfsburg is doing. There's just so many different pressing styles. We'd be sat here forever talking about them, but those 3 currently seem to be dominating the scene. I also wanted to pick 3 different clubs from 3 different leagues. So this is not to say like Bayern doesn't have a good pressing style or Chelsea doesn't have a good pressing style. I just simply wanted to kind of pick and choose from different leagues. So what are your opinions on this? Is this something that you've picked up on? Is this something that you have noticed to improve in the women's game? Is it just something that has popped up now? Which out of those 3 teams do you most enjoy press and play? Obviously, all of them are enjoyable, but does one of them stand out to you? I'm sure you probably have a favorite, so let me know down in the comments. Other than that, to make sure you stay updated and to continue enjoying the beautiful game, and make sure you subscribe to us here on YouTube and follow us on Twitter. I will see you later.